Hello, and welcome to the fourth and last episode of our online conversation series about jazz in the time of pandemic. A very special welcome back to our great friend, musician Lucian Ban, who a month ago agreed to make this very special series of dialogues. I don't know if you have any regrets, Lucian, but for us it has been a real privilege to get this insider view of the world of jazz which you have made possible. Like throughout the series, you are joined today by guests of the highest caliber whose influence on the European jazz landscape is beyond doubt. Pelin Opcin, EFG London Jazz Festival Director, Nadin Deventer, Artistic Director of JazzFest Berlin, who is going to join us shortly, Patricia, Jochheim, Jazz Programmer at Opderschmelz Art Center in Dudelange, Luxembourg, and Olivier, Conan, Director Opera Underground Opéra de Lyon. On behalf of the Romanian Cultural Institute in London, I'm grateful to all of you for being with us today. Lucian Ban, you have the microphone.
Thank you, Magda, and thank you, the Romanian Cultural Institute in London, for hosting this series. It was indeed unexpected for me to do it because it came after a dystopian trip from New York to Bucharest. And immediately, I think the second day I got an email from you, we were quarantined. And I said, oh my God, this now? But then I start doing it. So, and it has proven to be actually very good for me personally. And I hope for a lot of people that I did it with. And a lot of the views and all of that, we got a lot of messages back. Several musicians, programmers, critics. I want to thank everybody for taking part. I know you were shortly introduced. I've worked with most of you. I've worked most with Olivier because we both live in Brooklyn. I mean, he activates in Brooklyn with his club, Barbez. I also worked with Patricia once. I did play London Jazz Festival before Pelin came on board. And I have never played Berlin Jazz Festival, but I played Berlin many times, and as I played London many times. So I want to thank you all for taking part in this. And this one is special for me because it's not with musicians. It's with actually the other side of our community. But at the same time, it's also very unique because the moderator, if I can use this word, it is a musician. I'm pretty sure all of you have discussed with your colleagues. So you've discussed between yourselves, like with organizers, what are we doing? What's going on? But maybe you have less the chance to discuss with having somebody on the other side that's a musician. So for me, this is a special one for all the reasons that I mentioned. And let me just, before I open the first question, let me just say this. And it's sort of a personal statement. I had to fly out from New York, where I live, for more than 20 years. A week ago, Sunnyside released an album of mine. I never thought that's going to happen. I never had it in mind. Initially, Francois Zalaken, the owner, arranged a FedEx overnight to get me some CDs from Kentucky. And when I got them, I was happy, but I said, this is madness. Why? What are we going to do? This was March 22nd. New York was just starting to explode. So, of course, the scheduling went ahead. They released the album. It's getting now a lot of attention. I'm happy, but I still feel very weird. It's very weird to release a piece of music. It was set in motion months before, a year before. It's an album with Matt Maneri and John Sermon, which I'm sure you all know those people. So what I want to say, the reason I mentioned this personal insert is, in spite of us trying to get back to normal, I want to tell it as a musician and as a human being, it's very weird what's out there. I know we're trying to find, I have tours, we all have those issues. It's very weird for me looking at all the tragedy that's happened in New York, where I'm close, but I'm sure England as well, I know, to try to do the normal things. But at the same time, I know we have to do them. I know I have to do things. I know I have to respond to problems. So let me just shortly dive right into it. Is pretty much everybody, because I know we're in America and Europe, is everybody out of isolation? Is the relaxation in full place? Maybe you can start with Pelin.
Hi. Interesting. Must be a very interesting experience to have your music released in these times, but it's also some sort of a proof of music has no boundaries. So no, you know, the shape and form can change, but I think the way we make sure the arts and music can be accessible to people, I think we need to be more creative around these things. And I am personally keeping a positive focus, of course. In terms of practicalities, the life here in London and in UK in general, as you know, you may follow up from the news that the UK, the crisis hit the UK as a follow-up to the world in general. And looking at the statistics in Europe, we followed up the pattern a bit later, and the lockdown started here around the third week of March. It wasn't a complete lockdown. We had the chance to have one exercise per day. The unfortunate thing was, even before the lockdown, the messaging around how people should behave was more like, even though when the concerts weren't cancelled, the messaging from the government was towards the audience saying, don't go to concerts, don't go to football matches and the pubs, but we were still open, we were still doing the shows. So that was a short period where we saw some kind of a damage without an official force majeure backing the industry. And when the lockdown officially started, as I say, it's relatively relaxed compared to Spain and Italy. We could still go out for shopping and, you know, the exercise, one exercise per day. 2 weeks ago, there were further relaxations. You know, you can meet one person outside of your household. There are conversations about opening the schools partially beginning of June, but that has to come alongside scientific data, and all the institutions and the authorities are following the scientific data and mostly the guidance from the government. When it comes to live music, entertainment hubs, and productions on stage, there is still a big unknown on how we can actually open up the venues and start engaging with audiences in terms of fully live experiences. There are conversations around, obviously, social distancing. You might have seen from the Reuters report on how the social distancing rules are in place in certain areas in the world, in parks, in restaurants. We've seen examples of parking, you know, lot concerts. We've seen examples of semi-live digital events, etc. We are definitely working towards several scenarios, but at the moment, it's obviously some leading cultural institutions taking the lead in deciding on their own standing if they will be open soon or not, and if they can open with social distancing measures in place, because most of these buildings aren't easy to operate with limited capacity, how their bars and toilets will function, etc. So everybody is actually focusing on measuring, calculating how to make life easier and possible, you know, the live experience possible with these new measures in place. And I think we are still in a state of limbo, so to say, because nothing is certain. I mean, even though certain realities is backed up by scientific data, we don't necessarily know how the virus behaves, how it develops within the communities, societies. So we are very much tied to what the rest of the, you know, other promoters, institutions, and the communities are deciding. And obviously developing alternative responses on how we can keep producing music.
And we will touch on those immediately. Yeah, I want to. And so if I'm sorry to interrupt. So if UK is relaxing now, I want to ask, so we can, on part of Sirius, because I know Sirius does year-round events and programming and a lot of other programs aside from the big flagship event, which is London Jazz Festival. Are your events all cancelled now? Until when?
Yeah, well, between that period when the lockdown was announced, like mid-March, and until September, we had to reschedule or cancel mainly reschedule our events. That means actually a volume of a series of events almost equal the size of EFG London Jazz Festival. So during the festival, we have mostly our productions, but including all the, you know, events that we present under the umbrella of the festival. We have 400 actual live performances, including workshops and, you know, like, of course, the concerts are the main body of the festival. Just imagine around half the volume of that is actually being canceled between March and September, because May and June are among our busiest period. And it was incredibly hard to manage the rescheduling. And it was damaging in terms of our financial structure, so to say. We are still standing strong and looking positive for the future. But just to give a sense of the volume.
This is very good, yeah.
You know, and the artists, you know, the performance opportunities for artists are, you know, have vanished. So yeah, that's the picture, and then we can talk about how we responded.
Yes. So just to sum it up, everything till September is cancelled or rescheduled, but it's cancelled. Eventually, it has been rescheduled.
Mostly rescheduled. Rescheduled. Yeah.
Patricia, can you tell me about Opderschmelz? Also is doing year-round programming, and you had a festival, Jazz Machine, and with residencies. Are you out of isolation? It's Luxembourg opening up, and are your events cancelled till when?
It's pretty much the same than in UK. We have scheduled everything till end of August. Well, for us, it's not that bad because in summer we don't have shows inside. So
I see.
And the whole, like for example, the whole Like a Jazz Machine festival has been postponed to next year, and we asked the artists and the agencies send us an invoice so we can pay you a deposit fee of 50% of the fee, so that they can survive somehow.
Yes, so that.
And now, yesterday, the government said, now you are allowed to open the venue, but you have to, but with all these restrictions, you have to wear a mask, you have to sit down, there must be 2 meters distance between, and then
we will talk. Yes, I will talk more about this, about how we're going to open up concerts and events. Yes. Thank you for all this. So your events are also stopped till September. Yes. Everything. Olivier, I know you manage two venues. The small and so influential one, Barbès, that it's my home base, and in Brooklyn, and you also do Opéra Underground in Lyon. What's the situation there from this standpoint? I know you're not even in New York.
Well, yeah, I'm not in New York and I'm not in Lyon, but I am virtually in those places at all time, because I'm mostly work for the Lyon Opera House right now, which is takes a lot of my time, and it's been crazy. Obviously, I think the situation is very similar to that of Luxembourg. I think it's about the same rules. We canceled all. I mean, I run essentially 3 stages. I have my main stage, which is a capacity of 200 people, where I do programming from September through June. I have an outdoor festival, which is every night, usually early June, mid-June through end of August. And then I do shows on the big stage at the of the Opera House, which is like classic 1,100 seats. Everything is canceled. Was canceled starting mid-March. First canceled and or rescheduled until the end of August. I started rescheduling a bunch of shows from the spring onto the fall. Those shows have now mostly either be re-canceled and rescheduled. September and October, we are not going to have shows. So we are planning on starting again in November. Obviously, what capacity with what rules, it's all up in the air, so we're not sure. But so it's a lot of shows canceled, a lot of trying to reimagine. We're gonna
go ahead, Patricia.
I see your hand like that. I thought you were saying something.
Yes, it's like in school. But did you choose to cancel until November, or did the government say you have to shut everything?
It's sort of a gray area, because there's not that much very strict directives. Actually,
yes.
Minister of Culture or the Prime Minister. I can't remember. The Prime Minister is talking, I think, right now in an hour with new measures. September and October we close because basically we cannot abide by the new health rules. We have to have at least a 4 square meter area per per audience member, which would turn our capacity from 200 to like 30, I think. So it's impossible to maintain. So that's why.
So you will not do it with social distancing in underground opera.
We can't. It's just not possible. It basically would become a studio, which we are going to do. I mean, I can talk about it later if you want, but we are going to try to have some sort of a live life with concerts that will be played to no audience and with some sort of streaming happening. But we can't really have an audience. It's just not possible. We are trying to have one show in the big room in October, which we have maintained. Just trying if social distancing can work there, but instead of our capacity of 1,100, it's going to be a capacity of about 300. We're trying to figure it out exactly and how safe it can be. Obviously, it's not a model that can work economically. So it's the opera being a completely subsidized house. It's different from either a hybrid economy or a completely for-profit.
But how do you deal with the tickets? Then you have to be sold out with when you sold 300 tickets. How do you control them? You sell them at one point? Do you understand?
We're still dealing with that.
Yeah.
We're going to put a limited number of tickets for sale. Mm-hmm. We are not going to have assigned seating and you will be seated by the ushers on a specific spot from which you can really leave until the end of the concert. Mm-hmm. You will not be able to have an intermission, and there will be at least 2 seats in between people, unless it's people who live together who are coming together, which is very hard to gauge. Obviously, we can ask for a certificate of occupancy from people to see if they actually live together. It's a new world. Trying to cope with it. I personally don't see it working all that well, but we keep trying things and they'll work.
That's a very good real insight into what's happening in the venue and with the programming. And a lot of it has to do with economics. A lot of it has to do with health, of course. Just to give you a sense. What I want to discuss, because I wanted to ask you where are you now and what's canceled, because mostly what I want to talk is what's happening in the future. And of course we're gonna focus on the nuts and bolts of these aspects, like the social distancing, the usher, how do you put the people. But I also want to discuss about new strategies and about the idea of hope, because there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of programmers have different economical models. Maybe Luxembourg is more subsidized. Maybe France is more subsidized. I bet Barbès is not subsidized at all.
For sure.
I know UK is somewhere between US and Europe in terms of the way financing works. So I want to talk, and now I have some specific topics, and I want to hear your idea, because some of the things that we are discussing are things that I'm sure US programmers and artistic directors were already thinking. How do you get a new audience? The jazz festivals and jazz circuits already had issues. Is better now to go with the idea of small and better, or still keep 80 concerts or you should cut it to 40 and make more money and allow the resources to go there? If the economic model is based on tickets, and you have to bring big names, you have to bring the Gregory Porters to make money, is that still going to go on? So my first question is to all of you, because I want to cover as much as possible. We're going to talk about streaming, and I'll tell you also my take on it. And I'm also very directly involved, because in October, I have a tour in US with Matt Maneri Dust Quartet all over Midwest and West Coast, bigger festivals and small venues. And in November, I have a tour in Europe, actually in England as well. I don't know if they will happen at all. So it's also a question from me directly to you. So let me ask you this question: is less better? And this is one of the way of the future. Let's go to Pelin.
Okay. Like you said, maybe we should have been discussing these and considering these, and maybe behind the scenes we were in the near past before this fast forward happened, and it kind of provided us the drive to look into it deeply. We were always thinking about and actually committing into and developing the digital strategy, the digital output, making sure digital work is actually the representation of our live output, not necessarily replacing it. And now we are considering how the world is gonna shape up the live performances were the actual income stream of the musicians. And if they are also vanishing, what's going to happen with the actual creators? So let's start with the creators, the artists. If there's no artistic output, if there's no artistic creativity, there are no new productions, either directly produced by the artist or facilitated by producers like us. Where is the artistic content going to lead, going to go? We are now eating up from the archives, the other, the film theater productions, the previous films. These also will stop because all of these artistic creations are actually brought by a few minds coming together, if not a few musicians coming together, producing stuff. So there is the on-site element of the productions as well, let alone getting the audiences together somehow. I'm also concerned about how we can facilitate the artistic creativity, the production. So that's one side of it. The other one, the question you had, the jazz festivals always played it by the air, to bring in the popular names, the bigger names, to make sure that there is an audience, because it wasn't us reinventing the wheel. It was how the record companies, the publishers are actually pushing these artists to come to a position. And we were the platforms to have them engage with the audiences. Yes, bring in the box office, but never compromising from artistic value. Of course, these artists are also valuable and, there's no doubt about it. But then that model was actually subsidizing the other stuff that we took risk. We were more adventurous. And like Olivier said, our economy is also a mixed economy. Yes, we do have funding from Arts Council. We do have some private sponsorship. We work with some charities. We raise funds. But at the end of the day, 70% or more is actually coming from box office. So when that is lost, we either get smaller to just respond to whatever we have in the pot, or not give up and try to come up with additional ideas for revenue streams, which then helps actually the artists, because it's not just about a very passive way of receiving the funds and then responding to the funds by producing something to tick some boxes for these funds. We have to produce things to engage with the communities, to serve our vision, artistic vision, our missions, but also to definitely provide platform with the artists. We are that bridge. So yeah, I think when we talk about the future scenarios, the digital, inevitably will be one of the models without exploiting it too much, because there's also an overkill of digital content at the moment. But again, we'll have our creative hats and tackle the problem hopefully positively.
If I can intervene, this model of actually bringing a big name that's subsidizing more risky and more experimental stuff, it's a model that a lot of festivals are doing. I just comes into mind John Gilbert from Earshot Festival in Seattle. When I played a couple years ago, he told me, Lucian, I just had Keith Jarrett in the big hall. After we paid everything, we were left with enough to bring you and another 5 bands and Tony Malaby and John Holland back, and that's how it worked. And I know you, Pelin, you also pivoted London Jazz Festival to other spaces to get a newer audience that's more connecting that connected to dance, for example. And I know you already did that at London Jazz Festival, like getting out of, Elizabeth. Last time I played London Jazz Festival was at John Purcell Room with an octet, which is as classic and as you can see it, So if you're gonna lose this model of being able to bring big names that subsidized by tickets and box office, the more experimental stuff, what's gonna happen in November?
I just always use this example. Netflix didn't kill cinema. Cinema will still live. The experience around live music is still gonna live. So we have to mimic that experience somehow into our digital output. It has to be good quality, etc.
We have to discuss about that.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced how well the model translates to this music that is so communal. This music bears on intimacy. Being that over 400 people dancing to the Comet, to Sabacha in UK, or in Barbès, or even in, I'm sure in Berlin, just because Magda told me Nadin just got in. Berlin also innovated with the spaces. I know that. But let me see if I see Nadin.
Yeah.
I can't. Do we have Nadin? There's Nadin. Nadin, thank you for joining us. This is Lucian. Do you know everybody here? I'm sure you know Pelin. I don't know if you know Patricia. Do you know Patricia from Opderschmelz Center in Dudelange, Luxembourg?
No, but I've been listening to you guys.
Wonderful.
So.
And so you were introduced also to Olivier, who has, he lives on both sides of the Atlantic as a curator and a programmer. So my question is, we started, is less better? If some of the previous models do not work, how you who are one of the most important parts of the equation, how will you allow creativity for us to still happen, let alone logistics and money and budgets? Even if let's say Dudelange keeps my concert, if the smaller venues on tour in November cannot do it, I cannot keep the tour. So this is just a small, I'm a medium level, So how, if these things are changing, I know example, and I admired what Berlin did with the alternative venues and sort of changing the pivoting. So I want to ask Nadine, if the former models are probably, they're not going to work either because of rules of social distancing imposed by the authorities and other things, maybe the artists who are traveling will not be able to get there. How are we going to keep the music alive, basically?
Well, this is the big question, right? And I think that we are all in the middle we are all in the process of figuring this out. And this is why also these webinars are so meaningful to me. I mean, I'm also part of this Europe Jazz Network. It's an organization for organizers from mainly Europe. And we have more than 150 members. And we also installed some 7 weeks ago already. We just call it a think tank. So every Wednesday morning, there's a couple, there are around 30 organizers, festival makers, colleagues who are running clubs across Europe and abroad. Also some journalists, also some agents who are and musicians, national initiatives, musicians initiatives. And we are thinking together, like exchanging experience in this crisis, to update ourselves coming from various countries across mostly Europe, but also abroad. And to kind of stick together in this crisis that means a lot of isolation. You know, we all experienced, or we are still experiencing the so-called lockdown, which means complete isolation, even inside of your living room, like literally. And borders closed, as we all know. So this is also a form of isolation that is, at least for me, a very bizarre experience, to be honest, and it's also frightening in a way. So in a way, what I'm saying is, and what I'm benefiting from and also extremely grateful for, is to get into touch with you guys, musicians, with our community in Berlin, with the whole Berliner Festspiele infrastructure, with the partners of the JazzFest Berlin and others, and also abroad, like especially also people abroad living in other circumstances to talk, to exchange ideas, to also share this trauma that some of us went through or are still going through. It's a global crisis, pandemic, that nobody really has experience of how to deal with this. And I think that we as a sector, musicians, managers, agents, journalists, and also organizers, curators, we can only get out of this if we exchange and talk and think together. And I think up to now, nobody has the solution yet. This is the big challenge that we all, that we can kind of, that we need to face in order to go on, of course, you know.
If I can intervene, your festival is at the beginning of November?
Yeah.
Will it happen?
Yes. Somehow it will happen, yes, because we have the digital world, we have a digital possibility, and this is what's happening now, right? That events, lots of events, or also festivals that already took place during the lockdown went digital, and they did this switch in a very, very fast way, which I admire extremely, because you kind of take a whole analog event into the digital world, which is not obvious. And there are also, as we know, lots of musicians who are doing this, streaming from out their living room. So in a way, the digital world connects us and also keeps this art form and the cultural, I mean, all of the different art forms belonging to our cultural sector alive in a way, right? But I don't know if this is, this is what happened so far and what is still happening. But for the future, and also talking about November and thinking about our festival taking place in November, we are thinking about possibilities of how to combine the analog experience, the live experience in a venue with the digital experience, combining musicians that can't travel because of travel restrictions, possible travel restrictions or lockdown, with musicians.
So do you see possible? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want everybody to hear. Do you see actually in November possible a traveling band to perform without an audience in Berlin JazzFest, or with a social distancing audience?
Of course, it's a very strange imagination. So far in Germany and also Berlin, everything has been cancelled. We still don't know exactly our restrictions that we will be facing. The so-called rules are not defined yet. Up to August, everything is shut down. And the politicians now need to come up with all of these physical distance rules and all of the restrictions that we can, of course, all estimate. We all have an idea of what it would mean. But I feel obliged also as an institution to be part of an institution, to do my very best to keep the business alive and also to keep musicians busy, you know, and to really come up with ideas of how to deal with these extreme conditions the best way possible. And even there is also a reaction towards this crisis to go local, meaning that lots of festivals and organizers, of course, are now supporting their community, their local community and artist scene, which is the best way to deal with it right now. But I'm a bit afraid if we kind of, it is a global crisis, right? And especially also what's happening in the States and also in Brazil these days, it's so hard to see. And also support of musicians and culture, also in the States, if you would compare this to the situation, a lot that we have in Europe, not everywhere in the same way, but still there is a kind of political and economical support. And I'm busy, I'm a bit concerned if we, as a reaction, let's say for another year, focus more or focus only on our local scene. What will happen with the international ecosystem that we build up, right? I see this, politically speaking, as a danger, because this is a culture of diversity, and we were all supporting this for many, many years now all together. And if we now go only national or local for another, I don't know how much time, 12 months, or nobody knows, right, how long all of these restrictions will be in place. We also need to come up with ideas, I think, and to develop them all together, of how to keep the international circus alive in a way, you know.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and I want to tie it into the next question, is the idea of commissioning and residences. I mean, these are all ideas that you all toyed with it before. And will they become more important now? And I want, since you brought the digital element so much, and it is already a part of our life, and it will have to be more. First of all, I just want to say, as a musician, there's no way to play live with musicians in another space. Technologically, it's not possible in our music. I cannot play with somebody from Minnesota or from Brooklyn. If you're close by, and the internet is good, the latency gets better. But in this music, it's so that should be said. So we can do solo stuff, and we can re-record, and then, record before and stream it later, which is a lot of people what they do today. So it's already an obstacle. But I want to ask a general question to all and give the microphone to everybody else. Is the new digital thing the savior, or is it a new plague? It's intimacy. It's part of jazz. It's a communal music. And it was, and it changed. It became more fancy, more hip, more into the venues, more into, South Bank Center. But at core, jazz, as it best, it's the way it happens at Barbès in a way. It's intimate, and you interact with musicians and with the audience. So is the digital thing a wishful thinking for real, or it actually, can it happen? Let me, Pelin, and then we'll move to the next one.
I don't think anyone here is saying that digital is going to replace the entire live experience. We're just saying we have to have a continuity of the work, the provision of platform to the artists so that they continue producing, performing, and bringing in some income. And also we need to keep, our audiences intact, keep connecting with them, connecting with our community. So at the moment, the digital provision is actually not to replace the actual goal or the actual experience, is to survive this possible year or however long it is. We can't just stop. We can't just say, okay, we don't have any venues and we can't produce. It's not just for the institutions to stay alive. It's just for the arts to stay alive. There has to be a way. There has to be an outlet. And at the moment, it looks like digital or semi-live performances are the way forward, at least for a while, when we have no more social distancing measures or restrictions. And I have a belief the moment that we are fine, even if there's a medication, if there's a vaccine or some positive developments around it, day one will be almost the same. I have a belief, seeing young people in the parks, how kind of careless and courageous they are. I can see them rushing to the venues, because that needs to stay as bread and butter to the people. The oxygen, the water, so the arts, the enjoyment of artistic events. So we need to keep that taster in place so that we don't lose it. So it's just a temporary solution.
So you see actively actually commissioning, for example, for the London Jazz Festival in November, if you will not be able to present as many acts as you planned already, do you see commissioning and doing streaming with musicians and then presenting it within the frame of London Jazz Festival, and you are actively planning for that?
We have several different plans. Like Nadin says, the festival will take place in some shape or form. Be it the festival has ladders, right? The smaller performances with limited capacity, but then bigger ones. We are working on models if we can bring in the smaller capacity events into bigger spaces so that there is more social distancing possible in the room, but also combining semi-live exclusive ticketed experiences, which are then either pre-recorded and streamed afterwards or streamed live. But this is just one of the models. We are totally geared up doing the festival in some shape or form. And that's not just defined by our own initiative, it's defined by how other venues and key players in the sector are actually responding to the crisis. We don't have our own venue, so we are very much dependent on partners, and we create some areas where we are not dependent on partners, so that we can take our own direction. And that's the area we are actually working on, which is producing our own digital output from now.
And do you think small will be is better, smaller, and that's the model for the near future?
I don't really think so, and I never believed that the former model of the larger and the bigger artists subsidizing the rest of the festival didn't work. I didn't really believe. I really believe the mixed economy actually helped the festivals thrive and survive. When we think about a genre which could be seen as a niche genre, is now really closer to the mainstream, and this was only possible by the festivals, bigger communities coming around it. So I think it worked, and I'm not gonna say that we should delete that model just because this happened. We are not the only industry suffering from that. The holidays industry, the travel, museums, etc. So I think, of course, we need to look at the new ways of responding if similar crises occur. But I'm not saying, oh, we need to go smaller because the nature taught us that we need to go smaller. Yeah, I mean, there has to be a way of figuring out, reading the signs and finding the right balance, so to say.
Olivier, what do you think of this from both running a small venue and the bigger one in Europe?
Well, what I see happening, and it was already happening, but it's being completely overly emphasized now, is there's a dual economy in music, especially in music that is more creative or more difficult or more personal, I would say, which is a case of a lot of personal projects from jazz artists. You have the big economy, which has to be subsidized, where artists get residencies and commissions and can play for places that are essentially not for profit and can afford to lose money and lure an audience, such as the Opéra de Lyon or the big subsidized jazz festivals, and then you have the smaller venues such as Barbès, which happens to also operate in a very neoliberal system of purely supply and demand and for-profit world. What's going to suffer is the creative impulse. I think like artists who have to develop their own, have to develop projects on their own that are not trying to please and are not trying to fit into a category, such as a lot of what you do, are going to have a really, really hard time in a supply and demand world. How are they going to make a living? I mean, Barbès is not a model anymore. We can't really survive. Nobody's going to help us. We may be able to survive and reopen in a year or whatever the case may be. But I think we're in great danger of having a much more mainstream population of musicians that will have access to the bigger venues, that will have access to the bigger commissions, that will have access to the streaming world also. So how are we going to be able to keep representing less popular music in a world that is dominated by a different model, a different kind of funding? I have absolutely no idea. I am not super optimistic. We'll keep trying, but we are going to need help from big money, from governments, and we're going to have to reassess what creativity is. If it's is it based on pure supply and demand, which is a very, very scary thing, or is it going to be somehow supported by a community? That if that community cannot be a community of small, well-meaning, well-intentioned people, because there'd be no access to smaller clubs and smaller circuits, how are we going to ensure that it is possible? Who is going to decide in the big institutions who gets the commissions among the people that are lesser known? To me, that's one of the big problems. This dual economy that's going to maybe lead to a kind of monopoly of taste. Are you following me?
Yes, I am. Patricia, how is the situation there? I know Luxembourg, it's a little maybe on a privileged side because there's a serious commitment for culture and arts from the authority, which, let's put it right there, it's subsidizing. It's money.
Yes, we are quite lucky in Dudelange because the city spends more than 10% of the whole budget into culture. So, which means not only jazz, but world, fête de la musique and everything what's going on. And also we have over 100 different communities. They have their own, I call it parties, fête des cultures and so on, and that all this goes to into these 10%, over 10%. And for us at the venue, that's why we can afford, we can pay the artists now for the shows that have been rescheduled. We can pay them 50%, which for us means we pay it now, and even when the show only happens next year, we have more money next year to spend. So we are very lucky with this situation. But what you said about the big names, for our venue, Enrico Rava is one of the biggest names, for example. And it's not our business to book, like you said, a Gregory partner. It's because we spend public money, and our philosophy is to make we also want 2 contemporary art galleries. It's to bring art to everybody so that everybody can afford it. And if I'm interested in a Gregory Porter, I don't go to a small venue. I don't expect good music or less known musicians and so on. Do you see?
I see what you're saying. Is so the digital thing, do you, Olivier and Patricia, do you think it will be more integrated into your future programming?
It's maybe it's because I'm no longer 25. I can't imagine it. But what next week we will have a meeting with my colleagues at work. So we will discuss to invite local musicians, because traveling is not possible, and maybe to record and to stream it from our venue. So that's professional, not like this live from the living room or session from the garage and something like that. But we have to think about it, how we can do it, and then we've been also thinking about to invite guests. That looks more like a concert, because many of our shows, if we have 80 people in the audience, we are more than lucky. Yeah?
I see. So a lot of it bumps into actually a situation that none of you can avoid it. What's the economical model, how you run it? So if you have more support, you're in a better position. If you are in Brooklyn, where your rent is, I don't even know what's the rent for, for your place, and it's only from what you bring in, it's different. If you get subsidized in how it's in Germany and in England, it's so money will play a serious role. My question to all of you is, keeping all the things that you are all trying, and I see, and I knew that EGN is doing meetings and webinars and stuff. I knew about it. I also had a little experience of dangling in the other side. I booked a club in New York 15 years ago. I helped run the Bucharest Jazz Festival for 3 years. So I know a little about all these things, how they work. But my question to you, because I gradually gave that immediately, I only stayed like for 1 or 2 years in doing those things, because I'm a musician foremost. How will the music change now? We can talk about all the logistical challenges that you have as presenters. My question to you as presenters is, how will the music change from that going on forward?
I think it's also, again, a matter of dialogue, right? I think that presenters and musicians, we all need to hook up and think about it together. We all need to we can present what you guys are doing. And as the circumstances are so different, as we all knew it, and also what you said is of course absolutely right. It's the music of intimacy, right? And it's the encounter between musicians and audience that we are facilitating, and what it's all about. And with all of these new rules, like to have half or even more empty rooms, it's more than a loss of half of the audience that every club and every theater is facing at the moment. The atmosphere is totally different, and I think that again it's up to all of us together to come up with ideas, to try out things of how to make it work. I don't know if a band X that I had in mind to book this year for the JazzFest would work in the venue that we have in mind for this, the main venue that we have in mind for this edition of the festival, in the way they usually play, you know. So I am talking to musicians, and then we need to kind of figure out what to do and how to create an event that makes sense in the end, you know.
So I have a question to all of you, because I'm in a way I'm maybe the perfect example. So in fall I was supposed to do a project connected to Bartók field recordings. I already started it a couple of years ago, and that was one of the albums that got released with John Sermon and Matt Maneri. This year it was supposed to be with Gerald Cleaver, Matt Maneri is on board as well, and Luis Clavis. So the producer started discussing with me and said, how about you guys do it from wherever you are, each one of you composes something, and then we see what we put together. And I talked to Matt, and we were like looking at each other, and I said, I'm not sure how we can pull this thing off. I don't even know if we can do it. I'm talking about inside. Of course I can sit down and listen to Bartók's Wax Cylinders, what we did with John Sermon over 10 days in Timișoara. We stayed there 10 days and developed all these 100-year songs. And then we did 2 concerts, a workshop. We played in his hometown, and then we recorded one of the concerts. But we stayed together. So I'm talking to Matt in Boston. How are we gonna do this in November? Actually, the producer wants to try to put it together, wants to pay us. So he's doing the right thing, like you say, to keep it going, you know? But I'm talking to Matt, should we even ask Luis Clavis? How are we gonna do this? You're gonna compose something in France and then send it to me as an MP3 and I'm gonna record over it? It's the way we're doing music is not really like that. Yes, you can do overdub. You can do that. There's a way of doing music, but not the way we are doing music. So take this as a generic example. And I'm curious how each one of you are responding, even if it can be within the frames of your organization or not. Do you see this something like this possible?
May I jump in very briefly? Pop world has been doing this forever. The overproduced music is actually, none of these big stars that you see that are duetting aren't actually in the same room. So if we don't want them to overtake with the technological infrastructure and the money they have, we have to be resilient and come up with solutions to make sure that intimacy is carried through another medium.
As much as possible.
As much as possible. And
so your advice is actually go ahead and do it this way.
No, my advice is, I didn't assume that you were asking for advice. It's an open-ended question. It's not, there's no simple answer to that.
Yes.
But again, going back to my previous answer, what you do right now is like a marker or a holding response to what's going to happen in the future. So even if you do something like pre-recorded or dubbed over or produced in a way, I wouldn't want to see it as the full work. It could be the teaser of the future work, to sort of have a placer for it, but then promise the nice future where we actually see the full form of the work. If we keep silent, I mean, I'm talking about, of course, I can't talk about on behalf of artists, whom I actually believe, we don't know what the artistic response at the end of this will be. It could be a booming, period of incredible, crazy ideas, multiple disciplines combining, backing up the music. I'm sure a lot of bright minds are actually working in producing great stuff and turning crisis into a creative opportunity. But, it's just, I can talk on behalf of the artists, but if we stop, Teddy has arrived, our dog, sorry. If we stop, that means we kept silence and will be forgotten. So let's not be forgotten. Let's keep producing something almost as a placeholder, a teaser, keep the taste developing. I don't know, I still have this optimism that people will miss it, and then when the actual experience is available, it will be back to normal, in a different normal maybe, but yeah, we have to. So my advice would be maybe not necessarily doing the full format like that, but having a teaser or something.
Okay, no, that's a very good input.
Very pragmatic answer, but
we were literally, this discussion happened 2 days ago. I was talking when we were trying to move forward, and I said, okay, how is this going to work? What do you think, Olivier?
Well, I think it cannot work in a way that it usually does, in a very organic interplay. I mean, a lot of jazz is based on how you play with other people, and that's just, you know, something that happens in the moment. You know, you can't play with a drummer by imagining what he's doing. You have to play together. So the only thing that you can do if you're at a distance is play extremely scripted, written music, which is not at the heart of a lot of jazz. I mean, it is, but it's not there's always a part of improvisation that cannot be done, at least not with the technology that we have now. It's not impossible to imagine that very soon we'll be able to have ways of playing with no latency. I think a lot of people are working on it. It's almost as important as the vaccine for musicians. Let's see what happens. I know there's a couple of people that are already offering solutions. They don't work, but it's not impossible. But for the time being, you have to reinvent new projects. And I really want to hear the one you're talking about with the Sclavis Maneri and you. I mean, that sounds really amazing. But it's going to have to be completely written. And why not? You know, why not just have something super scripted for the time being? It can be an Oulipo kind of approach to those new projects.
So from what I get it from all of you, it's that is the idea of being proactive. Actually, if it's not going to work fully the way we're used to in fall, at least do teaser and do commissionings and do some part of it, with the idea that you will present the full thing when everything will work nicely. Let me ask again, all of you, how will a successful festival look, you think, in fall? Because you have big festivals in fall. Let's assume they will happen in a form or another. How?
They're not.
Patricia, you have a Festival de Noir. What was the name?
Yes, Touch of Noir. Yes, but it's not only a couple of days in a row. It's over 1 month, and it's theater, it's dance, it's ciné-concert, it's reading sessions, and so on. It's not only about jazz, but I have no idea. But I'm shocked. I'm deeply shocked, afraid that I have the impression you all think that this will never stop. For me, I hope. And that we can start in September, or maybe beginning of October, with normal content.
But Olivier is saying no.
It's not going to happen. I'm sorry.
Olivier says no. It's not going to happen. So let me then ask the real question to all of you. Are these concerts will happen in November? Let me put a date. Olivier, you say it's not going to happen, correct?
I mean, it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely. I mean,
why?
Well, because there's an epidemic going on, and it's not going to disappear magically until there's a vaccine. It's just not. You know, we have a lot of epidemiological models. None of them are predicting that it's going to go away on its own. We have a percentage of 7% of the population that has been infected. Yes, I'm sorry.
So that's very good, Olivier, because you said it. You actually don't think it will happen in November. Patricia, you actually think concerts will happen in Opderschmelz in November?
Yes.
Pelin?
I hope you're right.
Olivier, do you think that no concerts at all will happen, or no cultural activities at all will happen in the States this year?
Things will happen, but I mean, I know I'm not going to be able to pack people in my little room for at least a year, most probably. A lot of institutions in the US are starting to announce that there's no shows until, now it's until January. Minnesota just announced that it would be March. And more, you know, all the September festivals are canceled now. There's no way of having concerts with extremely strict social distancing and that are viable, especially in the US, where most of the economy is
You see, Olivier, this this is, I'm sorry to overstep, this is an emotional thing as well. Pelin is much more optimistic, or maybe it has to do with the fact that she's coming out of Erdogan world. I don't know, but I think she...
And Germany is doing
So
way
do you
better
think
also.
Pelin is
I mean,
London Jazz Festival concerts will happen in November?
As I say, in some shape or form. I mean, we need to park our old learnings. We need to get geared with our new learnings. I'm not saying digital is the only answer, and I'm not saying the actual festival as it is going to happen. But there's going to be a midway where we will find an outlet where we can present rich content, which we can name as the festival, at least for this year. I mean, this year or whenever this ends. I mean, now we thought, oh, we cancel out 2020 as if it has never happened. Maybe it will go until spring 2021. Whenever this ends, you know, the AliExpress founders, there's an internet meme is like circulating. He's saying the profit of this year is to get out of this year surviving, not making a profit. So we are actually, the way we survive will be constantly providing some content and some communication with our audiences, providing our artists to play, be the you know, 90,000, 100,000 ticket selling festival, but it will be a different one. And we will still continue working with hundreds of artists, but the format will change. So if you interpret it that way, the festival will happen.
I didn't mean to be totally pessimistic, by the way. I mean, I do think that we have to continue doing whatever we can. I am booking the opera season in November and December, and I'm trying to keep it as local as possible, trying to minimize the the disasters that could happen. You know, I'm not booking touring bands anymore, or at least if they're touring, that they be from, you know, Benelux, and France, pretty much. And streaming is going to have to play a part. That's, I think, a big topic. We have to think of it not as a bunch of surveillance cameras doing a passive job, but kind of reinvent or even invent an art form. There are people that are very good at filming and recreating reality. You know, there's a big school of documentary filmmaking that started in the 60s and still exists today, with people who are really thinking it as a medium. It's not happening yet with streaming. Give it another 3 months, 6 months, and it probably will happen. You know, we'll have some more creative minds coming up with ideas of streaming that are more recreating reality, recreating the experience of intimacy, which is crucial to enjoying music. So there's a little bit of hope there, I think. I didn't want to be completely all dark.
Nadin, what is our concert going to happen at Berlin Jazz Festival in November?
And I hope so. I mean, if everybody's talking about the second wave, right? And that might take place or hit all of us in Europe or Germany in November. So we really don't know, right? It's so difficult. I mean, it's such a crisis we are all in. And I also think we are still under shock. We are getting out of the first shock wave, let's say, and trying to understand what's going on. And this morning I had a conversation with our dear friend Piotr Tokiewicz from Wrocław, Poland. And he's also, he's also having a little Jazz Top Hat edition in New York yearly. And he told me, like, all of these webinars, like looking for solutions, looking into the future, you know. So also this topic of this webinar is called What's Next. And he said, like, this is too much for me. I don't know what's next. Nobody does, you know. I mean, just face it. Just let's be honest that this is a big thing. It's a big challenge. And I totally agree with what Pelin said. To give up is not really an option, and to come up with new creative ideas of how to deal the best way possible with this pretty fucked up situation for our art form and for the artist world in general is our kind of destiny. You know, this is our task. This is what we need to do now. And maybe, and this is what Olivier just said, maybe some new art forms will come out of it, but there's no real rush, you know. We need to step out of this hyperactive, super dynamic world we are all part of, you know, this producing thing. Like, it's this is also an opportunity to really think the whole thing over, you know, and to kind of maybe slow down a bit, and also to ask big questions about our whole self-understanding of all of this crazy music industry, you know. And what you just said is like, what about commissioning works? What about community work? What about to put together a festival with a bunch of artists and they are together with all of us creating a new festival experience? What about this touring business, like fly in, fly out, play gigs like 30, 20, even 10 in a row? Artists don't know where they are, and presenters are also in a rush. Everybody is constantly in a rush, you know. And this crisis also puts this into question, because it doesn't work anymore at the moment, and we don't know for how long it will not work anymore. So yeah, it's a time for, it's a crisis, and crisis also is asking for new solutions and creative ways of dealing with this.
This was the model, Nadine, and everybody. Yeah. At least for the majority, 80 to 90% of our artists in this in contemporary jazz, we were flying every day from Venice to Marseille, from Marseille to Gatwick, because the agent booked there because it's a cheaper flight.
Yeah.
And then getting to London is not that easy. That's how we did it. And
it's
we were
crazy.
We were being doing it. John Sermon told us, well, you're doing now what I did in the 70s. So he says, we did the same. He said, well, some things were different, but you are doing now what we did. And we already knew in a way that it's almost crazy to making it happen, but the passion for music is there, and we all wanted to do, presenters and musicians, you know. But so I want to end with, because we already went over the hour, with the last question.
Look, but can I just add one little thing? Mm-hmm. Because me as a presenter, when I try to work in a different way with artists, because I'm not coming from this touring business at all. I'm coming from the free scene. I've been involved in a lot of performing arts productions and festivals and stuff. So I'm thinking quite a lot in terms of communities, meaning to bring artists together and to stay at our festival for a couple of days, to work together, to perform several times. And this is hardly possible with this system in place, because you guys are all flying in, flying out. You guys are then touring and stuff. So if I do want to do this, to make artists and musicians work more, to be in Berlin for, let's say, 5 or 6 days, to develop new work with local artists, to give lectures or workshops, and also
Can you do it? Were you able to do it?
No, we do this. We try to do this, and there are also other organizers who are doing this. And maybe in the future, I'm just saying, you know, because we are like all asking us these questions: how will this world look like in the future? And maybe this might be a more common model for the future, to not have this overdriven fly in, fly out and hyperactive business going on, maybe because it's stressful and hectic for everybody, especially for the musicians, but also for us producers and organizers, you know. And in a way, the audience, they love it to see artists several times playing at a festival in different contexts. And this is what jazz musicians do. You have so many different projects going on. You guys are so flexible and have this gift of being improvisers that, I mean, this is much more interesting for me also as a creator, the process of creating something altogether next to presenting what you guys develop and have, like having new albums and all of this stuff. It's not the one or the other, it's a combination of everything, you know.
I can tell you as a musician, this is a golden idea. There's the way the model has been in the past 10 years, 15, since I've been touring intensively, the US and Europe and beyond, it has been this one.
Yeah.
You know, better names get 2 days, 3 days, you know, they can make it work. But if you as presenters can get together and actually find a common way to get closer to this idea, would be really tremendous. I'm not fully convinced it works as a circuit. Maybe Berlin JazzFest can do it, but in order to apply largely, it will have to work with the whole circuit.
Absolutely.
So I want to end, and I see, with the exception of Olivier, but everybody's very optimistic, and I like that. I know all of you had a sort of agendas of how you want to implement your vision for the festivals and your organization. I know there's a lot of issues, and some of them we couldn't discuss. There's funding issue, there's the aging of the audience, there's the gender imbalance. Are some of these, or all of these, sacrificed because of the crisis? Let's actually ask, let's ask Pelin and then go, so we can mix it a little.
No, we don't compromise from diversity, gender balance. We don't really compromise from our visions when we are producing anything that we can produce at the moment. It's just it's postponing the previous work, of course, to the future. But as I said, the festival had letters, different. The festival I'm talking about, but Sirius's work in general had different profiles that we were talking to, we were reaching at, and that pattern will definitely be repeated and maybe even developed further, improved further in our future work. So definitely not compromised in that sense. And I don't know how aware how the UK jazz scene is actually developing. There's a huge UK jazz boom from a younger generation of artists. It actually happens more or less every decade, or like 15-20 years, where there is a huge jazz boom with a new generation of grassroots artists being able to attract more attention from a younger crowd. And it's happening right now for a while in the UK. So luckily, we thought we were overcoming the old question of, is jazz becoming a music genre which is not necessarily for the younger crowd. I think at the moment jazz is at the core of youth culture, club culture in the UK, and we were just enjoying the fruits of it, which we will definitely continue with whatever works we've talked about, be it digital or live. So yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the diversity or the balance or the younger people joining up with the current audiences. We don't compromise from that.
Olivier, are your plans for opera, and I mean Barbès is in a more difficult situation, I would imagine. Are they going to have to be sacrificed because of this, or you can actually see your vision?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we can separate the problems of having to put shows together, and knowing if people are going to be able to tour, and the whole logistics and economical aspect of it, and the actual curating part of it. That doesn't really change. I mean, I think we apply the same principles. We just hope we can make it work, but there's no reason to sacrifice, so just like you said, any of those ideals. Absolutely not. So I don't think that's a problem. The main problem is, I feel really schizophrenic right now because I have my operating on survival mode in New York, where my decisions are not really mine. They're all based on, will I survive? And then at the opera, where I have a much wider vision and what kind of new principles we can apply, new models we can implement, because there's the luxury of knowing that you have support. And these are very, very different. Are you operating on survival mode, in which case a lot of things such as going to go down the drain, or are you able to build something new with a new set of problems?
Patricia, is the mission of the center going forward?
Of course. And we won't change our philosophy. It will stay the same. But I have another question. Where's the audience in all these discussions? That's what we need, what you need.
Well, Pelin seems to say the audience is there.
Plans and so on, but does the audience want it like this? Do they want to go to a show and sit 2 meters and not be allowed to have a cigarette or drink after the show and so on? I think, especially in jazz, it's the exchange, it's the contact between everything. The presenter, the musician, the audience, that makes it work, that makes it unique somehow.
Pelin
I
seems to really think that audiences want to come out to concerts to experience even if it's restricted with social distancing. Am I right, Pelin? This is what you believe?
I think I don't want to give you any wrong information, but about a month into the crisis, there was research led by, you know, some leading organizations like AEG, Live Nation, especially, you know, done in the United States, and the audience reaction was really gloomy. They didn't want to come back. Even the festivals are back. They did, like 52% said, no, we don't want to go. But now we need to build up from the remaining. We don't have that data. We don't have that survey or, you know, research in the UK, but we already have limited numbers of capacity. So we need to start from scratch the year and not assume, oh, they won't come back, so let's give up. Okay, build up the financial models based on the fact that maybe there will be a handful of people coming, but we need to try. This is the reason of our existence. So we need to try, and then there will be word of mouth. There will be some confidence building back again, and we will then respond to that new normal, whatever that is.
So I want to thank all of you for taking part, because we already went over. And Pelin, I also want to say just a word about. I know you Sirius was dealing with the loss of John Cumming. Who was the person that I actually worked when I presented UNESCO Imagine at South Bank. So I know you're affected about that. So my thoughts are with you, and please pass whatever you can to whomever. My thoughts about that. I can only say this. First of all, thank the Romanian Cultural Institute and Magda for making this possible, and thank you because I know you already did webinars and stuff. But I thought that discussing with a musician, it's maybe brings a different angle. And in November, I am supposed to tour. I hope I will see some of you.
So do I.
Now we have the context. So I was supposed to play in London. I was supposed to play in Barbès, in Lyon, not at Opéra, and not Berlin wasn't part of the plan. But I will let you know. Just because we had this talk, if that happens or no, and of course in Dudelange, and I'm looking forward to that. And thank you for taking part, and thank you for what you do. You are right. We are in this together. It's very important to be able to talk both sides. And I know there's so many issues, economic, funding. There's so many problems, countries, governments. You have Brexit on top of this. So that affected as well the way of coming in and out of England. So you see, I told you, Pelin is a survivor.
I mean, Brexit is a first world problem, compared to this, and my previous crisis experience is so different than this. This is global, and we are all in the same ship. So
thank you so much for taking part in this, and please let's stay in touch again. And I hope I will see you at a concert and at one of your events. Okay.
Thank you all for this. Thank you all for this very revealing dialogue. It is extraordinary to get such a clear sense of the efforts that are being made by jazz festivals, directors and presenters in navigating the uncharted waters of the pandemic. We are looking forward to enjoying other magical moments at the events that you organize, which I'm sure the loyal jazz public, as well as people who perhaps discovered jazz music during lockdown, will go to with real enthusiasm when things will come back to normal. Please allow me a final massive thank you to pianist and composer Lucian Ban for these 4 conversations, which brought perspectives on how the pandemic has affected the jazz community, the musicians, the audiences, festivals and institutions that work to present live jazz and improvised music. Thank you, Lucian. It was a pleasure to work with you and all your amazing guests. And together with my colleagues at the Romanian Cultural Institute, we will be equally honored and delighted to continue supporting jazz events in the future. Thank you again all for being with us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you all.